Hello everybody, how's it going? It's me, Krendor, and welcome to my tutorial for how to play Age of Sigmar. And I'm going to be breaking it down into three sections. We're going to have extremely basic, we're going to have a little more in-depth, and then we're going to have a lot more in-depth. Because I did my non-content battle report, and I had some people be like, I have no idea what's going on, or like, maybe you should make one for beginners. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just make a tutorial video for beginners in general, because there's a lot of different how to play Age of Sigmars out there and different types of tutorials and everything, so I figured I would just make a one-stop shop broken down into three different segments. And that way, you can kind of learn the game a bit, and then learn a bit more, and then learn a bit more. And I feel like that's the best way to learn. Now, I'm not a tournament player, I'm not the best player ever, but I've played a pretty good amount of Age of Sigmar games, so I kind of know what's going on. I think enough that I can educate people that don't know what's going on. So, the first thing we're going to learn is the Warscrolls, because if you've never played Age of Sigmar before, and you get some units, and you see these cards, you're going to be like, what the shit is this? What do all these numbers mean? What are these words? Alright, so we're just going to break it down and do a little demonstration. Alright, we're not going to talk about command points, we're not going to talk about abilities, we're just going to talk about the basics, okay? So we've got 5 Chameleon Skinks here, and we've got 5 Saurus Guard over here, okay? That's what we got. These are the units we are using. So, what do these numbers mean? Well, first things first, you've got your movement. That is, this might blow your mind, how far those units can move. So that's 8 inches. So you know, if you want to learn how to measure, you do this, all right? And you can move 8 inches, okay? So you like start from there and they can move up to the 8. I know, it's crazy, right? Now, with movement, you cannot move within 3 inches of another unit. So if this was like, if these are the other units here, right? You can only move up to this point. Because if you want to actually get near these units, you have to charge them. We can learn about charging later, but that is definitely a rule. You cannot move within 3 inches of another unit. So you can move 8 as long as you're not within 3. Alright? There you go. That's movement. There's also running and other stuff, but, you know, for now, that's the main point. You can move 8 inches with these Chameleon Skinks. So, then we've got your save roll. That's for when we get into combat. You got your bravery, that's for after combat, and you got your wounds, which is pretty much your hit points. So every one of these skinks has 1 wound, so 1 HP essentially. Now if we look at the Saurus Guard, alright, they have 5 inches of movement, so they can only move 5 inches, alright. They've got 4 plus save, that's for combat. We've got our 8 bravery, and we've got our 2 wounds. So each one of these guys actually has 2 hit points. So, let's just get straight into a little combat thing, alright? So, let's say these guys are going to shoot these guys, alright? In order to shoot, you need missile weapons, okay? Now, there's a whole phase for shooting and stuff like that, but this is just learning how to read what you're looking at here, alright? So, they've got dart pipes, 16-inch range, so we already know they have enough range to hit them. 2 attacks, so the attacks is just how many attacks each of these get. So 2 attacks means this guy gets 2, this guy gets 2, this guy gets 2, this guy gets 2, and this guy gets 2. So that's what it means, right? 2 attacks, so each one has 2 attacks, which means they have 10 attacks. So bam, there we go. Now, let's move on. Got the ring light showing. There we go. So, to hit, you have to roll 3s, which means you have to roll a 3 or higher in order for your dart pipes to hit the Saurus Guard. So, let's go ahead and roll. Take the dice. I'm just gonna blap. Okay, so we've got 3 1s. Fantastic. A 2. But a bunch of 4s and 5s, so all of these are going to hit. The other darts have went like, pew, and missed, and they're flying over heads, but we've got 6 of them that actually hit the Saurus Guard. Now, just because they get hit by it doesn't mean that they're hurt by it. Maybe one of them gets hit, and it hits him in the hand, and he's just like, and he just shakes it out, right? There's a whole bunch of, you know, imaginary roleplay stuff you can think up for what happens. Maybe it hits a shield, whatever it might be. So to wound them, you have to roll a 4 now. Okay, so we're gonna roll again, and all of them. Okay, so 2 of them wound. So means after this whole process, 2 of them wound. No rend. So rend is, we can talk about rend when we get to the Source Guard. 1 damage, which means each one of these die hit for 1 damage. So we've got 2, so that's technically 2 damage. So now we go to the Source Guard, who have been hit. All right. So how do you, like, what does that mean? So we go to their save. So the save roll is a 4-up. So that means in order to not take the damage, they have to roll a 4. So they're going to take these dice, they're going to roll them, and they rolled a 6 and a 4. So they block all of the incoming damage. Again, you know, you can decipher how that works. Maybe they get hit and it actually wounds them, but they're like, I'm fine. You know, whatever. Like, you can... Maybe it did hit a shield. Maybe they have super resilience. Maybe, you know, whatever, right? But they ignore the damage. That's the main thing. So rend impacts the save roll. So say over here you've got -1 rend, all right? That just means when you're doing the damage, and say this was -1, instead of a 4, it would be a 5. So you're negatively impacting your opponent's save roll. So it's kind of, you know, it's rending them. So it's like, oh no, it's got a -1 rend, so they'd be on 5-ups, and then, you know, I think I rolled a 4 for one of them, so one of them would have went through and did 1 damage. So that's all that means. So rend just impacts your opponent's save rolls. So now, let's go ahead, we're going to ignore all rules and everything and say these Source Guard have now charged in and are attacking the Chameleon Skinks. Alright, so now we're going to do melee. So now the Source Guard also have 2 attacks each, 3x3, -1 for 1 damage. So there's 5 of them, so again, we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Technically they get an additional attack for having an alpha, but for purposes, we're not going to care. Learning purposes, so we're gonna roll. And so 3x3s, which means only 1 misses. Wow, that's a good roll. I wish I could roll like that in an actual game. All right, and then 3s again. Wow, okay, that's 4 1s. Let's get these out of here. But all of these do hit. So that's 3x3, all right, -1. So that means we're gonna negatively impact our opponent's rend, so as you can, or our opponent's save roll. So the Chameleon Skinks are saving on 6s. So if you have, so normally if there was no rend, a 6 is the way they could ignore the damage. But since they don't even have a way to kind of negate the rend, there are ways to negate the rend through other means, but for this learning tutorial, we're just going to say, oh no, right, that's a 7. You can't actually roll a 7, so they just automatically take the damage, which means they would take 5 damage, since they are 1 damage each. And since they only have 1 wound, they would all be dead. Now, there's various other things that can happen. They have ward saves. You can do command points to give them +1 to save, so it negates the rend. There's buffs you can do. There's a whole bunch of stuff, right? But for learning purposes, I think it's easier to just be like, oh, I see what happened, so now they're dead, right? So that's pretty much how to read these War Scrolls, okay? Now, one thing I didn't talk about is Bravery, all right? Bravery is a little bit of a complicated thing, but it's not complicated at the same time. It's one of those things that sounds more complicated than it is. So, say we only did 4 damage, okay? So 4 die. All right, so 4 Chameleon Skinks are dead. So 1 is left. So when you get to the Bravery Phase, which is the last part of a turn, you roll a dice and add the number of models that have died together. So I had 4 Chameleon Skinks die. Now I'm going to take a die, and I'm going to roll it, and it's a 5, which means 5 plus 4 is 9, and our Bravery is 5, so you take the 9 and subtract the bravery, which is 5, which is 4. So that means 4 Chameleon Skinks would run away from combat. And since you only have 1, he would run away from combat as well. Because he is afraid and fearful, and his friends just died, and he's like, ah, shit, I'm getting out of here. So that's what the bravery roll is. So you actually want to roll very low on your bravery. So we just had 4 Chameleon Skinks die, right? So if I would have rolled a 1 on my bravery roll, that would have been 4 died, plus 1 is 5, and that would have been equal to the bravery, which means he would have stayed. But even if I would have rolled a 2, that would have been 4 dead, plus 2 is 6, that's 1 greater than the bravery. He would have fled because he's the only one left. Now, if you look at the Saurus Guard, they have an 8 bravery, so they are a little more like well-trained, a little more disciplined, so even if their friends die, they don't really care as much. So say, you know, 2 Saurus Guard died, right? So let's go ahead and roll a die. It's a 2, so that's 4, because 2 plus 2 is 4. 2 plus 2 is 4, and that's a bravery 8, so obviously they're completely fine. In fact, if they would have rolled a 6 here with 2 dead, that would have been an 8, and that still would have been fine, because it would have been equal to the bravery. But if 3 would have died, and you rolled a 6, then that's a 9, and then 1 more would have fled. So you can see how, even though these are like a lot higher numbers, they're still kind of sticking around. And that's pretty much the bravery roll. So that's, you know, for the grand scheme of things, that's pretty much how to read the Warscroll cards by not looking at the bottom half. But I think a lot of people just look at the top half of the card and they're like, oh, okay, I don't know what any of this means. But if you can kind of figure out the top half, the bottom half can come a bit easier, especially once we get into the next segment where we're going to learn more about how the phases and the actual turns work. Alright, so we've progressed to round 2. Now we're going to learn all about all the abilities and descriptions and all the stuff under here where you're like, what the shit's going on, right? So we've got a Slan out here now, the old Slan Star Master. He's being guarded by his Saurus Guard, and these Chameleon Skinks are from a different Lizardmen tribe or something, I don't know. So they're fighting each other, alright? So we're going to begin with the Slan, alright? We're not going to talk about turn order and phases and all that. We're just going to talk about what's on these scrolls. So let's just take a look here. So this model can fly, which means if the Slan, let's see, so the Slan's got a movement of 5, okay? So let's say the Slan was right here by this tree. That means he can move 5 inches, and if 5 inches is right here, instead of measuring around the tree, he can fly, so he's just like, and he just floats over it. So that's, you know, having flying can be great for moving around hard to navigate terrain. It can help you get places easier. You can literally just be like, woo, and fly over units and stuff. At least I'm pretty sure you can do that. Usually when you fly, you ignore unit interaction and everything. You can't, I don't believe you can like land on top of a unit, so you can't do that. But, you know, if you have a path to land, you know, you can move up here, as long as, again, you're within 3 inches of or outside of these units, right? So that's what flying is. He has a single model armed with Azure Lightning, so that is his melee weapon. He doesn't have any ranged attacks. Let's see what else he's got. When this model attempts to cast a spell before making the casting roll, you can pick a skink wizard within 12 inches of this model or friendly blah blah blah. Okay, this doesn't really matter right now. This is more once you like understand the game a little better. So that's just, you know, sometimes units have synergies with other units. That's kind of what this is. So he can like cast through a skink wizard as like a way of kind of being like, let's say normally he can cast a spell for like 12 inches, right? But if there's a skink wizard here, he can cast through him to gain another like 10 to 12 inches or something like that. Or I think it says 12 inches. So that's kind of what that is. We don't really need it right now. Foresight, at the start of your hero phase, roll 2 dice for this model. Each 4 up, you receive a command point. So once we get into the phases, we'll explain that. Add 1 to casting, dispelling, and binding rolls for this model. They're very good. In addition, this model can attempt to unbind enemy spells that are cast anywhere on the battlefield and attempt to dispel endless spells anywhere on the battlefield. So, We also have the magic section coming up. So let's talk about magic real quick, okay? Because that's usually in the ability section of this. So when you cast spells, it normally happens at the start of your turn in a phase called the hero phase. And typically wizards can cast one spell unless it says otherwise, which if you look at the magic section here, it says this model is a wizard. It can attempt to cast 3 spells and unbind 3. So Slann are very powerful wizards, so they can cast more than typical wizards. So they get 3 spells to cast. And let's just say we're going to cast a spell called Magical Spell, okay? And this spell is going to go off on a 7. So every spell has a casting value, and that casting value is what you have to roll in order to cast it. So, as you can see here, we add 1 to all our rolls, because, you know, we're a powerful wizard, so we get a little bonus to our casting. And whenever you make a casting roll, you have 2 dice, and you roll those 2 dice, and that's your casting value roll. So, we need a 7, and we got a 6 and a 2, so that's an 8, and we also get +1 from that, so it's actually a 9. So we would be able to cast magical spell. Now, if there was an enemy wizard within, I believe it's 30 inches. If they're within 30 inches of you, they can attempt to unbind your spell you just cast. And they do that by rolling dice themselves. And they got a 7, and that would not unbind you because you have to roll greater than their casting value. So he technically rolled a 9. So if you rolled a 9 trying to unbind it, it still wouldn't unbind it. You have to roll a 10 or higher. You have to roll higher than what they rolled in order to cancel their spell from happening. So after that happens, he can carry out the spell, whatever it might be. So it might be like, you shoot a magical spell at these guys for 1 damage, and it goes, blah, and it kills them, right? Kills one of them. So that's how that kind of works. So, for example, here we've got he knows 3 spells. He knows Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, and Comet's Call. So every wizard knows Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield. It's literally just the universal spells everyone knows. So if you look at the back of the rules, you've got Arcane Bolt, casting value 5, range of 12. If you successfully do it, you pick at the start of any phase a unit, and they take a mortal wound, and if they're within 3 inches, they can take D3 mortal wounds, which we'll get into. And Mystic Shield, casting value 5, and it adds 1 to save rolls. So like I mentioned earlier, if you're like, oh man, these guys are pretty squishy, I hope they don't die, you can be like, oh, you know what, I have a wizard, I'm gonna cast Mystic Shield on him, and that's a 7, so that does go off, and now these guys have +1 to save, so instead of saving on 6s, like we showed earlier, they are now saving on 5s. So even if somebody hits them with the -1 rend, that would pretty much balance out with the Mystic Shield, and now they're just saving on their normal 6s again. And then let's say roll, and it's a 6, right? Then you're like, oh, you know what? My Chameleon Skinks are safe after that attack, thanks to Mystic Shield. So that can actually be a really powerful spell that every wizard knows. And then Arcane Bolt's just a little bit of damage. So mortal wounds we'll get into in a bit, but that's I'm not even going to get into Comet's Call right now. I think, you know, I've kind of explained spellcasting in a pretty simplistic way. I would hope, at least. I think that's easy enough to understand. There's also command abilities. I'm going to get to command abilities in the next section because it's a little more, you know, right now we're just talking about abilities and magic. We're going to avoid command abilities right now because it ties more into the phases of the game. So let's go ahead and do some more shooting with the Chameleon Skinks, alright? Just like we did earlier. So we've got our missile weapons again, 2 attacks, 3x4s, 1 damage. But let's see what else they've got here, alright? So a unit of Chameleon Skinks has any number of models, each armed with a dark pipe and a celestite dagger. Get out of here, hair. I think it's an eyelash. Instead of setting up this unit on the battlefield, you can place it to one side and say it is hiding as a reserve unit. If you do so, at the end of your movement phase, you can set up this unit on the battlefield more than 9 inches from enemy units. So pretty much, you don't really, I haven't explained this much yet, but at the start of the game, instead of setting up these units on the battlefield, they can be like we're starting off the board, and then you can pop them up at any point during the game. So it's kind of like a hidden unit, right? So maybe you're, you know, on the board and you've got all your army set up over here, and then your opponent's all over here, and you're kind of like closing in, and then all of a sudden, way over here, like boom, the Chameleon Skinks just show up out of nowhere and hit you from behind. So it's a way of like flanking and having a little mystery and something the opponent has to think about. So that's what that ability is. Then we've also got Cover Modifier, add 3 to save roll. So this has actually been FAQ. This is not true anymore. This is pretty much, now they have a ward save of 4 near terrain. So ward saves, okay, it's getting a little complicated now. I think it's not too hard. So a ward save is, let's say these guys popped up by a tree, all right, some terrain. Okay. So now they have a ward save of 4. So let's say, like earlier, the Temple Guard attacked them and they did 5 damage. But they were near this tree. So what that would mean is if you did 5 damage and you have a ward save of 4, you take the amount of damage you're about to take, so 5, and you roll dice, and on 4s, you completely ignore that damage. So they would only take 2 damage because they rolled 1s on those. So a ward save is pretty much an extremely powerful save that can help you negate damage. There's a lot of Skaven things even, if you watch my battle report, where they have 5-up ward saves. A lot of people call it feel no pain because it's a way of ignoring pain. I think that's what they call it in 40k from what I heard. So, yeah, ward saves are just another way of having built-in protection, essentially. So they get that if they're near terrain. So it's a bit of a like, ooh, they just blended into the terrain. Where'd they go? They ignored the damage. You know what I mean? So that's how that fits in. That's why it's called perfect mimicry. Because they're like mimicking the terrain they're near, so you can't see them. And then Star Venom. So if the unmodified hit roll for an attack made with a dart pipe is a 6, it inflicts 1 mortal wound on the target and the attack sequence ends. Do not make a wound or save roll. So what is a mortal wound? All right. Let's pop these guys back out here. All right. Whatever. They're not coherent, but doesn't matter. So let's say they've just shot their 10 attacks, hitting on 3s, right? 2 attacks, 3x3, or 3x4s, so 3's to hit. Alright, let me get my 6, 7, 9, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so we got our 10 dice. I'm going to hope I roll a 6. Okay, so I've rolled 3 6s here, alright? So let's put these to the side, because it says if a hit roll is a 6, it inflicts a mortal wound and everything ends. So these are just 6s. We'll set them aside. And then these didn't even hit. So then we'll roll these, and on 4s, they wound. So that's 2 regular wounds, all right? So they're shooting at the Slan. So the Slan has a 4-up save, all right? So for these normal dice, he's going to go ahead and roll, and he saves 1, and he takes 1 damage. So it's like, whatever, right? He takes the 1 damage. He failed his 4-up save because he rolled a 3, and they don't have any rend, so it's not like it was impacted. And now we've got these dice. So, like, what's that? Mortal wounds are just straight up, it damages you. So mortal wounds are just extremely strong, especially in pretty much any meta this game's been in, like 2.0, now we're in 3.0. Mortal wounds are just straight up like, you are going to take this damage. The only way to negate this damage is through ward saves. So if the Chameleon Skinks were near terrain and they had that 4-up ward save, they'd be able to try and negate these by rolling. So if this was the Chameleon Skinks and they rolled, they would ignore 1 mortal wound and take 2. But since it's not, that's just straight up 4 damage that the Slan takes. So he's got 7 hit points, so he'd already be below half health. Now, we're going to check out the Saurus Guard, because maybe they have something that could help the Slan. And it was set up like this so that I could demonstrate it. So let's read. Alright, Saurus Guard. Add 1 model can be an alpha. Add 1 to its attack characteristic of its Celestite polearms. Alright. 5 models in this unit can be a Star Drake Icon Bearer. For bravery stuff, 1 in every 5 models can be a War Drummer. You can reroll charge rolls. Here's the one we're looking for. Roll a dice before you allocate a wound or mortal wound to a friendly Slan that is within 3 inches of any friendly units with this ability. On a 2+, you must allocate that wound or mortal wound to a friendly unit with this ability that is within 3 inches of a Slan instead of to that Slan. So, all that means is they are within 3 inches of the Slan, so they're pretty much his bodyguards with this ability. So, we've got our 4 damage we're about to take, but if we roll 2-ups, which we do for all of them, that means that the 4 damage, instead of being taken by the Slan, have now been taken by the Saurus Guard. So that's 4 damage to the Saurus Guard, and they die defending their Frog Wizard. So that is an ability the Saurus Guard have. So there's, defensive abilities, there's offensive abilities, there's magical abilities, there's a whole bunch of abilities that just impact the game. And that's why it's important to kind of read your war scrolls, because oftentimes when you're playing the game, people forget what abilities they have, because, sometimes you're just in the heat of the moment and you forget that your dart pipes roll 6s to do mortal wounds, and you just straight up, we're like, oh, I'm going to roll it normally, and you miss, and then you're like, wait, hold on, did I roll a 6? And you got to go back and be like, oh, wait, I did, so that was a mortal wound, so it hit, and then or maybe you forget your Saurus Guard are supposed to protect your Slan, and then he dies, and you're like, wait, I could have did the thing that protect the Slan. So, like, a lot of it's just remembering what you have. So that's just abilities. There's also abilities that buff other units, like give them +1 to hit. There's abilities that debuff your opponents, like giving them -1 to save, -1 to wound. There's, a whole bunch of stuff, depending on what army and what units you're using, so that's abilities.